Hey everyone. Throwaway account for obvious reasons. I'm not even sure why I'm writing this. It's not like typing it out will magically make it less real. But I feel like I'm losing my mind here, and I need someone, anyone, to tell me I'm not crazy. Her name's Jessica, my wife of 6 years. From the outside, our life probably looked pretty solid. Date nights every couple of weeks, a shared Netflix queue, inside jokes that only made sense to us. We weren't perfect, but I thought we were happy. I thought I made her happy. A couple of months ago, though, things started to feel off. At first, it was subtle. She'd make comments about me needing to hit the gym, or joke about me being too vanilla in the bedroom. I laughed it off because, that's what couples do, right? But then came the coldness. She stopped initiating anything. No cuddles on the couch, no spontaneous kisses, not even a goodnight peck. And then there were the workouts. Jessica suddenly became obsessed with getting in shape and started hitting the gym 5, sometimes 6 days a week. She'd come home late, drenched in sweat, with some new smoothie concoction she'd picked up on the way home. I figured it was just her new hobby, even encouraged her at first, until one night when she accidentally left her gym bag open. Inside was a lace bra and panties, definitely not the kind you wear for leg day. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe she liked feeling sexy, even if it wasn't for me. But then the text started. I'd catch her smiling at her phone, turning the screen away the moment I walked into the room. Once I asked her what was so funny, and she snapped, "Can't I have friends without you being so clingy?" That was the first real blow. Jessica had always been fiery, sure, but she'd never spoken to me like that. It left me stunned, replaying the moment in my head long after she'd gone to bed. I started noticing other things too, her staying out longer than usual, coming home wearing a new perfume I didn't recognize, and the way she'd conveniently forget to mention who she was meeting up with. I'd ask her straight up, "Hey, is everything okay between us?" She'd just roll her eyes and mutter something about me being insecure. It was maddening. One night, as we were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, I blurted out, "Jess, are you cheating on me?" She froze, her face a mix of annoyance and something else. Panic, maybe? "What the hell is wrong with you?" she snapped, slamming her laptop shut. "You really think so little of me?" I felt a wave of guilt crash over me. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being paranoid. But even as she stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly, irreparably wrong. A few nights after our argument, Jessica came home late again. This time, she didn't even bother coming up with an excuse. She just mumbled something about traffic and brushed past me into the bathroom. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the spot where she'd just been, my mind racing. This wasn't normal. This wasn't us. Something in me snapped. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. When she emerged from the bathroom, I forced myself to sound calm. "Jess, can we talk?" She sighed, rolling her eyes so hard it was like she wanted me to know how annoyed she was. "I'm tired, Mike. Can it wait?" "No," I said firmly, surprising even myself. "It can't." She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "What now?" I need to know if you're happy," I said, carefully choosing my words. "You've been distant lately, and it feels like you're pulling away." She smirked, a cold, dismissive smirk that cut deeper than any shout ever could. "Not this again. You're being ridiculous, Mike. Just drop it." But I couldn't drop it. Not this time. "Then why have you been so secretive? Why won't you tell me who you're spending all your time with?" Her eyes flickered for just a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. "Are you spying on me now?" "God, that's pathetic." I didn't respond. I just stared at her, waiting, and that's when she made her first real mistake. She fumbled with her phone, glancing down at it like it was burning a hole in her pocket. Before I could stop myself, I asked, "Who are you texting all the time?" Jessica laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "No one. It's just work stuff. Not that you'd understand." But her lie was paper-thin, and for the first time, I felt a surge of clarity. I'd seen her work emails. They weren't filled with emojis and LOLs like her recent messages clearly were. Later that night, while she was asleep, I decided to do the thing I'd been resisting for weeks: check her phone. My hands shook as I reached for it on the nightstand. I told myself it was wrong, that I should trust her, but a louder voice in my head screamed, "You already know the truth." The phone was locked, of course, but I'd seen her unlock it 1,000 times. I punched in her passcode, and it opened on the first try. What I saw made my stomach drop. There were texts, dozens of them, from someone saved as Jenna. Except Jenna wasn't a real person. The messages were explicit, filled with promises to meet up, descriptions of their time together, and even photos I couldn't unsee. And the name at the bottom of every text? Ryan. Ryan, her personal trainer. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the phone illuminating the betrayal in front of me. Every word felt like a dagger, confirming what my gut had been screaming all along. She wasn't just lying, she was living an entirely separate life. My hands clenched into fists as the texts blurred in front of me. This wasn't just some fling. This was planned, deliberate. She'd been careful, deleting messages and keeping me in the dark, but she'd slipped up, and now I had proof. Jessica stirred in her sleep, and I quickly set the phone back on the nightstand, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I was living with a stranger who had no problem lying to my face. Morning came too soon, and with it, the crushing realization that nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, Jessica acted like nothing had happened, humming softly as she made coffee. She had this way of pretending everything was normal, and for a second, I almost doubted what I'd seen. Almost. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to confront her without losing control. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw her phone at her and demand an explanation. But another part of me wanted to stay calm, to get her to admit it on her own. "Jess," I started, my voice trembling slightly. She turned, eyebrows raised. "We need to talk." She sighed heavily, leaning against the counter. "Again? What now, Mike?" Her casual dismissal ignited something in me. "I know about Ryan." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Her face went blank, her usual sharp retorts suddenly missing. "What are you talking about?" she finally said, but her voice had lost its edge. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, standing up. "The texts, the photos, everything. I saw it." Jessica's eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw fear flash across her face before it was replaced by something colder, defiance. "You went through my phone?" she snapped, her tone dripping with indignation. "Are you serious, Mike? That's a total invasion of privacy." "Privacy?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "You're seriously pulling the privacy card right now. You're the one sneaking around with your trainer, lying to me, to my face, every single day. And you're mad that I looked at your phone?" Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for the right words, but nothing came out. Finally, she crossed her arms and said, "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded, stepping closer. "Explain it to me, Jess. Tell me how those texts aren't exactly what they look like." She looked away, her jaw tightening. I needed something you couldn't give me," she muttered, barely audible. I froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" She met my gaze, and for the first time, there was something raw in her eyes. "I'm sorry, okay? But I can't help it. You've been so distant lately, and—" "Don't you dare put this on me," I interrupted, my voice rising. "I work my butt off to give us a good life, to make sure we're stable, and this is how you repay me? By running around with Ryan while I'm at work." Her composure cracked, and she let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, don't act like you're perfect, Mike. You think you're some saint because you work long hours? Newsflash, being a husband is more than just paying the bills. You stopped trying a long time ago." Her words hit me like a gut punch. I wanted to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, but a part of me wondered if she was right. Had I been so focused on work that I'd let our relationship fall apart without realizing it? But even if I had, it didn't excuse what she'd done. So what? You decided to solve our problems by cheating? I asked, my voice breaking. By throwing everything we've built away for some guy who spots you during squats? Jessica flinched at the venom in my words, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she turned away, her shoulders slumping. I didn't plan for it to happen, she whispered. It just did. Save it, I said, my voice hollow. I don't want to hear your excuses. The conversation ended there, with Jessica retreating to the bedroom and slamming the door. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the table where we used to sit and laugh, where we planned vacations and dreamed about the future. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and replaced them with ice. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, had betrayed me in the worst way. And now I had to figure out what to do next. For the next few days, the house felt like a war zone. Jessica and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was tense and clipped, like we were strangers forced to share the same space. She tried to act normal, making small talk about bills or the weather, but I wasn't playing along. I couldn't. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while she slept on her side of the bed, as if nothing had changed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those texts, those photos, and the smug grin Ryan probably wore when they were together. My thoughts turned dark. I wanted to confront him, to make him feel the same humiliation and pain he'd helped inflict on me. One evening, while Jessica was out again, probably at the gym, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew where Ryan worked. He wasn't just her trainer, he also managed the gym. I got in my car, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and drove there. The gym was brightly lit, the kind of place that promised life-changing results with upbeat music and motivational quotes plastered on the walls. I spotted him immediately, standing near the front desk, chatting with a group of women who hung on his every word. He was tall, muscular, and annoyingly good-looking, the kind of guy who probably used his charm to manipulate people like Jessica. I walked up to him, my heart pounding in my chest. Ryan! He turned, flashing me a friendly smile that vanished the moment he saw my expression. Yeah? Can I help you? You can start by explaining why you're sleeping with my wife, I said loud enough for the women around him to hear. Their chatter stopped, and they stared at us with wide eyes. Ryan's face turned red, and he stammered. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb, I snapped, stepping closer. I've seen the texts, the photos. I know everything. The women scattered, and Ryan glanced around nervously, clearly aware of the scene we were causing. Look, man, I don't want any trouble, he said, his voice low. Well, you've got it, I shot back. You think you can just waltz into my marriage and destroy everything I've worked for? You think this is a game? He put his hands up, as if surrendering. Mike, right? Listen, I didn't mean for things to get this far. Jessica, she said things between you two were over. I didn't know. Bull, I interrupted. You knew exactly what you were doing. I wanted to hit him, to knock that smug look off his face for good. But I stopped myself, barely. He wasn't worth it, not here, not like this. Instead, I stepped back and pointed a finger at him. Stay away from her, I said through gritted teeth. If I ever see you near Jessica again, you'll regret it. Ryan nodded quickly, like a kid caught sneaking cookies before dinner. You got it, man. It's done. I didn't wait for his response. I turned and walked out of the gym, my fists clenched and my blood boiling. The confrontation didn't make me feel better. In fact, it only made the anger worse. He was just as slimy as I'd imagined, and knowing he'd been with Jessica made my stomach churn. When I got home, Jessica was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in, her expression unreadable. Where were you? She asked. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my ears. I saw him, I said simply. I told him to stay away from you. Her face paled, and she set her phone down slowly. You confronted Ryan? Yes, I said, my voice cold. And don't even think about defending him. Jessica didn't say anything for a moment. Then she sighed and shook her head. You shouldn't have done that, Mike. It's not going to change anything. No, I said, my voice rising. But it felt good to see him squirm. To make him feel at least a fraction of the humiliation I felt. Her expression softened, and for a moment she looked almost sad. Mike, I'm sorry. I know I messed up, but you can't keep going down this road. It's not healthy. I laughed bitterly. Oh, now you're worried about my health? Spare me, Jess. She opened her mouth to say something, but then closed it again, clearly unsure how to respond. The silence between us was deafening, and for the first time, I realized just how far apart we'd drifted. I didn't wait for her to say anything else. I went upstairs, slammed the bedroom door, and sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. Confronting Ryan hadn't given me closure, and Jessica's hollow apology only made things worse. I didn't know what was next, but one thing was clear: this wasn't over. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache, the kind that comes from a night of restless, rage-fueled thoughts. Jessica was already up, moving around downstairs. For a brief moment, I thought about apologizing for my outburst, but then I remembered the texts, the lies, and Ryan's smug face. No, she didn't deserve an apology. I made my way to the kitchen, where Jessica was sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. The tension between us was suffocating, but she acted like everything was fine, as if we hadn't just had a blowout the night before. We need to talk, I said, cutting through the silence. She set her cup down and looked at me, her expression a mix of exhaustion and annoyance. What now, Mike? What now? I repeated, incredulous. Are you serious, Jessica? What now is that we're standing in the rubble of our marriage, and you're acting like it's business as usual? She sighed and rubbed her temples, like I was the one causing her a headache. I don't know what you want me to say. I've already apologized. That's not enough, I said, my voice rising. I need to know why. I need to understand how you could throw away everything we've built for some fling. It wasn't a fling, she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. Those words hit me like a freight train. What does that mean? Jessica hesitated, then crossed her arms defensively. It wasn't just some random thing, okay? Ryan, he made me feel wanted. He listened to me, Oh, spare me the Hallmark sob story. I snapped, my voice echoing off the walls. You think I don't want to feel wanted? You think I don't miss the way we used to look at each other? But instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you went behind my back and slept with him. Jessica flinched but didn't back down. You think I didn't try? I begged you to spend more time with me, Mike. But you were always too busy, too tired, too focused on work. And then you just stopped trying in bed altogether. You stopped making me feel like I mattered. Her words stung, but the mention of in bed felt like a slap. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my voice steady. So this is about sex? It's not just that, she said, but the way her voice wavered told me otherwise. It's everything. And I'm not saying it's all your fault, but... No, you don't get to butt your way out of this, I interrupted. You don't get to justify what you did by blaming me. I know I'm not perfect, Jess. But I didn't cheat. I didn't betray you. She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't done. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? Every time I look at you now, all I see is him. All I hear is the lies you told me while you were sneaking off to be with him. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You did. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of her betrayal hanging between us like a storm cloud. I could feel the cracks in our relationship widening, threatening to swallow us whole. Finally, I stood up, unable to take the suffocating tension any longer. "I need some air," I muttered, grabbing my keys and heading for the door. Jessica didn't stop me. Outside, the winter air was sharp and biting, but it felt good against my flushed skin. I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, my mind a chaotic mess of anger, sadness, and confusion. How had we gotten here? How had the woman I loved turned into someone I barely recognized? And then it hit me, maybe she wasn't the only one who had changed. Maybe I had, too. The thought was like swallowing glass. Had I really been so blind to her needs, so focused on providing for our future that I'd neglected the present? It didn't excuse what she'd done, not by a long shot, but it made me wonder if I'd been fighting a losing battle long before Ryan entered the picture. As I turned the corner back toward the house, I knew one thing for certain: we couldn't keep going like this. Something had to give. When I got back to the house, Jessica was in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch like she was waiting for me. Her arms were crossed, and her eyes were puffy, like she'd been crying. It didn't move me. I'd seen those tears before, tears of guilt, not remorse. "We can't keep doing this," she said as I walked in, her voice low. "For once, we agree on something," I replied, dropping my keys on the counter. She sighed, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I know I've hurt you, Mike. And I hate myself for it. But what's the point of us staying together if all we do is make each other miserable?" Her words should have stung, but they didn't. I'd been asking myself the same question all morning. "So, what are you saying? You want out?" Jessica hesitated, and for a moment I thought she might say no. But then she nodded slowly. "Maybe we both need some space. To figure out what we really want." The room went silent. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, even though I'd been bracing for this. "Space," I said bitterly. "Is that what you call running off to Ryan's arms while I pick up the pieces?" Her face crumpled, but I wasn't interested in softening the blow. "Don't act like this is for us, Jessica. This is about you. You're trying to make yourself feel better about what you've done." "That's not fair," she snapped, standing up. "You think this is easy for me? You think I don't hate myself for what I've done? I do, Mike. But staying here, pretending we can fix this, it's not helping either of us." "Then why not just say it?" I challenged, my voice rising. "If you want to leave, just go, Jess. Stop playing the victim." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she turned away, her shoulders trembling. "Fine," she whispered. "Maybe I will." For a moment neither of us moved. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, suffocating us both. And then she walked away, disappearing into the bedroom without another word. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own thoughts unbearable. I thought about the good times, our wedding day, the honeymoon, the nights we stayed up late talking about our dreams. I thought about the moments when I truly believed we were unbreakable. And then I thought about Ryan, about the texts, about the lies. The anger boiled up again, hot and uncontrollable. But underneath it was something worse, sadness. Somewhere along the way, we'd lost each other. Maybe it was my long hours at work. Maybe it was her insecurities. Maybe it was both. All I knew was that the person I'd married wasn't the same person I was living with now. And maybe I wasn't the same person either. The next morning, Jessica emerged from the bedroom with a suitcase in hand. She didn't look at me as she walked toward the door. "I'll stay at my sister's for a while," she said quietly. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Goodbye? Don't go? I didn't want her to stay, but I didn't want her to leave either. It was a paradox I couldn't wrap my head around. When the door clicked shut behind her, the silence was deafening. For the first time in years I was alone. The first night after Jessica left was one of the longest of my life. I sat on the couch, staring at the spot where her shoes usually sat by the door, her favorite throw blanket still draped over the armrest. The house didn't feel like home anymore, it felt like a museum of everything I'd lost. I tried watching TV, but every show felt hollow. I picked up my phone to scroll through social media, but seeing happy couples and family updates only made the emptiness worse. Eventually, I turned everything off and sat in silence, letting the weight of the situation settle in. The questions wouldn't stop. Had I done the right thing by letting her leave? Should I have fought harder for our marriage? Or was this the inevitable conclusion to a relationship that had been unraveling for years? The worst part was the loneliness. I'd grown so used to Jessica's presence, her laughter filling the house, her random humming while she did the dishes. Now, the quiet was unbearable. I wanted to hate her for what she'd done, but part of me missed her, and that realization made me feel pathetic. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains. It felt wrong, like the world shouldn't be allowed to keep turning after everything had fallen apart. I shuffled into the kitchen and made coffee, but even that simple routine felt off. There was no Jessica to complain about how I always left the sugar jar open, no banter about who'd drink the last cup. I stared at the steaming mug in my hands, and the anger started to creep back in. She had done this. She'd destroyed everything we had, all for some cheap thrill with a guy who probably didn't even care about her beyond their next session. I grabbed my phone and opened my messages, scrolling to Jessica's name. I hovered over the keyboard, my thumbs itching to type something, anything. But what was there to say? I'd already said everything that mattered. Instead, I texted my best friend, Matt. "You around? I need to talk." Matt showed up an hour later with a six-pack in hand. He didn't say much as he walked in, just gave me a knowing look and set the beer on the coffee table. "So," he said, cracking one open and handing it to me. "What's the situation?" I told him everything. The texts, the confrontation, the lies. Jessica leaving. By the time I finished, I felt drained, like retelling the story had sapped whatever energy I had left. "Man," Matt said, leaning back against the couch. "That's rough. I don't even know what to say." "Yeah," I muttered, staring at the bottle in my hands. "You did the right thing, though," he said after a moment. "Letting her go. You can't keep living like that, Mike. She's the one who messed up, not you." "Doesn't feel like the right thing," I admitted. "Feels like I just gave up." Matt shook his head. "You didn't give up. You gave her a choice, and she made it. Don't let her put this on you. She's the one who broke your trust." I nodded, but his words didn't bring much comfort. After Matt left, I sat down with a pen and notebook, something I hadn't done since college. I needed to clear my head, to get all the noise out of my mind and onto the page. I wrote about the anger, the betrayal, the sadness. I wrote about the good times, the love I used to feel, and how it had all gone so horribly wrong. By the time I set the pen down, my hand was cramping, but I felt lighter. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. For the first time since Jessica left, I felt a sliver of clarity. The pain wasn't gone, but I could see a path forward, one step at a time. And step one was figuring out who I was without her. The days after Jessica left were slow and monotonous, but they forced me to confront a question I hadn't considered in years. Who am I without her? For 6 years, my life had revolved around our partnership, our routines, our shared goals. Now, I didn't have her laughter filling the house or her constant presence to rely on. It was just me. And the quiet was deafening. I started taking long walks around the neighborhood, partly to clear my head and partly to avoid staying in the house where everything reminded me of her. On one of those walks, I stopped by a coffee shop I hadn't visited in years, a place I used to love before life became so predictable. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and the hum of quiet chatter immediately hit me with a wave of nostalgia. I ordered a black coffee and found a seat by the window. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something resembling peace. Later that week, I decided to tackle the house. Jessica's presence lingered in every corner, her clothes in the closet, her books on the shelves, her favorite mug still in the cabinet. It was too much, too raw. I started with the bedroom, boxing up her things and setting them aside. It wasn't an act of anger, but rather a necessity. I needed space, both physically and emotionally. Halfway through clearing out her side of the closet, I found a small, crumpled piece of paper tucked in the pocket of one of her jackets. I almost threw it away without looking, but something made me stop. It was a receipt from a restaurant, a place I'd never been. The date on it was from 2 months ago, back when her gym routine had become a regular thing. My chest tightened as I stared at it, the memories of her late nights and vague excuses rushing back. I sat down on the bed, clutching the receipt. I thought I was done uncovering lies, but apparently, there were more layers to peel back. That night, I called Jessica. She picked up on the third ring. "Mike," she said, her voice cautious. "Did you go to Leona's bistro with him?" I asked without preamble. There was a long pause. "Why does it matter? Just answer the question, Jess." "Yes," she said finally, her tone defensive. "We went there. A couple of times." I closed my eyes, trying to keep my composure. "You had date nights with him while I was at home waiting for you? It wasn't like that," she protested. We needed to talk. It wasn't always about." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice cold. "Don't try to downplay it. You lied to me, Jessica. Over and over again." "I know," she said softly. "And I'm sorry. I don't know what else you want me to say. I want you to understand what you've done," I said, my voice breaking. "You didn't just cheat on me, Jess. You destroyed everything we built together. For what? A couple of meals and some cheap thrill?" She didn't respond, and the silence on the other end of the line felt like a final nail in the coffin. After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours. The anger was still there, but it was quieter now, overshadowed by the sadness that had been creeping in since she left. For the first time, I allowed myself to cry. Not out of weakness, but because I needed to let it out. The betrayal, the loss, the uncertainty of what came next, it all poured out in a flood of tears I hadn't realized I was holding back. When the tears finally stopped, I felt, not better, exactly, but emptier. And in that emptiness, there was room for something new. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of resolve. I wasn't going to let Jessica's choices define me. She'd made her bed, and now she could lie in it. But I still had a life to live, a future to build, one that didn't include her. It was time to start over. Starting over wasn't easy. Every step forward felt like dragging a boulder uphill, but at least I was moving. I spent more time focusing on myself, something I hadn't done in years. I started small, like changing up my routine. Instead of staying late at work, I left on time and went to the gym. Not the one Jessica used to go to, of course. I found a small place across town where no one knew me, and I could work out without feeling like I was under a microscope. At first, it was just about burning off the anger and stress. But after a couple of weeks, I realized I actually enjoyed it. There was something satisfying about pushing myself, about feeling the ache in my muscles that came from my own effort. One night I was flipping through my phone when I stumbled upon a contact I hadn't spoken to in ages, my old college friend, Amanda. We'd drifted apart after graduation, but she was one of the few people who'd always had my back. I hesitated for a moment before shooting her a message. "Hey, Amanda. It's Mike. Long time, no talk. Hope you're doing well." I didn't expect a response right away, but a few minutes later my phone buzzed. "Mike. Wow, it has been a while. I'm good. How about you?" For the first time in weeks, I found myself smiling at my phone. Over the next few days, Amanda and I reconnected. She'd moved back to the area a few years ago and was working as a graphic designer. We exchanged stories about our lives, laughing about old college memories and catching up on everything we'd missed. Talking to her felt normal. Easy. It was a welcome escape from the storm of emotions I'd been trapped in. Eventually, she suggested grabbing coffee. Part of me hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face someone from my past, someone who might ask questions I wasn't prepared to answer. But another part of me craved that connection, that reminder that life could still be good. The coffee shop was warm and cozy, filled with the smell of freshly brewed espresso. When Amanda walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked the same, but more confident, like she'd figured out who she was and embraced it. "Mike," she said, flashing me a bright smile as she slid into the seat across from me. "Amanda," I said, smiling back. "It's good to see you." We talked for hours, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel weighed down by my problems. Amanda didn't pry or push, she just listened, offering bits of wisdom when I opened up about my struggles. "Sounds like you've been through the ringer," she said, sipping her latte. "You have no idea," I replied, shaking my head. "But I'm trying to move forward. Baby steps, you know?" She smiled, her eyes warm. "That's all you can do. One step at a time." When I got home that night, I felt lighter. It wasn't a magical cure-all, but reconnecting with Amanda reminded me that life wasn't over. There were still good people, good moments, waiting for me if I was willing to reach for them. The next morning, I opened the box of Jessica's things I'd packed up weeks ago. I didn't feel anger or sadness as I taped it shut, just closure. I texted her to let her know it was ready for her to pick up. "Your stuff is in a box by the door. Let me know when you'll come by to grab it," she replied a few minutes later. "Thanks. I'll come by this afternoon." When she arrived, I stayed in the living room, listening as she collected her things. She didn't knock or call out to me, and I didn't go to the door. The sound of her footsteps was brief, and then she was gone. For the first time, I felt like I could truly breathe. After Jessica picked up her things, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't happiness, more like a sense of relief, as if the last lingering thread tethering me to the past had finally been cut. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had space to focus on myself, my future, and what came next. I spent the weekend cleaning the house, purging everything that reminded me of her. Photos came down from the walls, her favorite throw blanket went into a donation box, and even the vase she'd insisted on keeping in the living room found its way to the curb. It wasn't about erasing her, it was about reclaiming the space as my own. By the time I was done, the house felt different. It was still quiet, but it no longer felt like a tomb of broken memories. It felt like a blank canvas, waiting for me to decide what to paint on it. Over the next few weeks, I leaned into my new routines. The gym became my sanctuary, a place where I could leave all the frustration and hurt behind. I started cooking again, real meals, not just takeout or frozen dinners. There was something grounding about chopping vegetables and experimenting with recipes, even if it was just for me. I also kept in touch with Amanda. She wasn't just a friend from my past anymore, she was quickly becoming someone I could rely on in the present. We talked almost every day, sharing updates about work, hobbies, and life in general. She never pushed me to talk about Jessica, but when I did, she listened without judgment. One Saturday afternoon, Amanda invited me to a local art fair. I hesitated at first. I wasn't sure if I was ready to step back into the world of normalcy. But something about her enthusiasm convinced me to give it a shot. The fair was bustling with people, a vibrant mix of colors, music, and laughter. It was overwhelming at first, but Amanda's easygoing nature made it bearable. We wandered from booth to booth, admiring paintings, sculptures, and handmade crafts. At one point, she dragged me to a pottery stand, her eyes lighting up as she pointed out a set of mismatched mugs. "You need these," she said, holding up a mug with a lopsided handle. I laughed. "Why would I need that?" "Because," she said, grinning, "it's imperfect but still functional. Just like you." Her words caught me off guard, but in a good way. I ended up buying the mug, and a few others, because, in that moment, it felt like a symbol of where I was in life. By the time we left the fair, I realized something that hadn't occurred to me before. I was happy. Not completely, not in every way, but in small, meaningful moments like this. "Thanks for inviting me," I said as we walked to her car. "Of course," she replied, her smile warm. "You're not as much of a grump as you think you are." I chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." That night, I placed the mugs on the shelf in my kitchen. They looked out of place, surrounded by the clean, uniform dishes Jessica had picked out. But I didn't care. They were mine, chosen for no other reason than the fact that they made me smile. As I sat at the table, sipping tea from my new, lopsided mug, I realized something important. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to live. Life continued to improve in small, steady increments. I found myself smiling more, laughing at jokes that would have fallen flat just a few weeks ago. The weight on my chest felt lighter, as if I could finally breathe without struggling. But the past has a way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. One evening, I was scrolling through social media when I stumbled across a photo of Jessica. It wasn't on her profile, she'd never been much of a poster. It was on Ryan's. The picture was of him and a group of people at some kind of party. There she was, standing next to him, her arm casually draped over his shoulder. They looked happy, like nothing had happened, like they weren't two people who had blown up my life just a few months ago. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, a mix of anger and sadness that I thought I'd moved past. My thumb hovered over the block button, but instead, I set the phone down and walked away. I didn't need to see that. The encounter stuck with me, though. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop replaying all the moments that led to this point. The lies, the confrontation, the look on her face when I told her I knew everything. For the first time, I wasn't just angry at Jessica or Ryan. I was angry at myself. How had I let things get so bad? How had I ignored the signs for so long? The thoughts swirled in my head until I forced myself to get up and grab my notebook. I needed to write it out, to make sense of the chaos in my mind. The next day, I decided to bring it up with Amanda. We were having lunch at a small diner, one of those places with checkered tablecloths and jukeboxes at every booth. "You seem distracted," she said, stirring her coffee. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I saw a picture of Jessica last night. With Ryan." Amanda's face softened. "Ouch." "Yeah," I said, leaning back in the booth. "I thought I was over it, you know. But seeing them like that, it just brought everything back." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's normal, Mike. Healing isn't a straight line. You'll have good days and bad days. The important thing is that you don't let those bad days pull you back into the past." "I'm trying," I admitted. "But it's hard. It's like, I keep wondering if there was something I could have done differently. If maybe this is all my fault." "Stop right there," Amanda said firmly. "This is not your fault. Jessica made her choices. Ryan made his. They're the ones who broke your trust, not the other way around." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them until that moment. "Thanks," I said, giving her a small smile. "That's what friends are for," she replied, her tone softening. That conversation stayed with me. For the first time, I started to let go of the guilt I'd been carrying, the what-ifs and should-haves that had been eating away at me. Jessica and Ryan were a part of my story, but they didn't have to define it. The days turned into weeks, and the picture of Jessica and Ryan slowly faded from my mind. It didn't hurt any less, but the sting was less sharp, the wound less fresh. Amanda was right, healing wasn't a straight line, but I was learning to navigate the twists and turns. I threw myself into the things that made me feel alive again. The gym became more than just a place to vent my frustration. It became a part of my routine, a sanctuary where I could focus on myself. I started exploring hobbies I'd long since abandoned, reading novels, cooking elaborate meals, and even trying my hand at painting. The painting thing didn't last long, turns out. I have zero artistic talent, but it didn't matter. The act of trying something new, of failing and laughing at myself, was enough to remind me that life didn't have to be so serious all the time. One evening, Amanda called me out of the blue. "Hey," she said, her voice bright. "What are you doing this Saturday?" Nothing, as far as I know," I replied, leaning back on the couch. "Good," she said. "There's a trivia night at this bar downtown. You're coming." I hesitated. The idea of going out to a crowded bar wasn't exactly appealing, but I could hear the excitement in her voice. I don't know, Amanda. Bars aren't really my scene anymore. Come on, Mike, she said, her tone teasing. It's not about the bar. It's about having fun, meeting people, and showing the world you're still alive. Plus, I need a partner who actually knows stuff about history. I laughed despite myself. Fine. But if I embarrass myself, I'm blaming you. Trivia night turned out to be, surprisingly fun. The bar was packed, the atmosphere buzzing with energy. Amanda and I found a table near the front and joined a group of strangers who quickly became teammates. We didn't win, but we didn't come in last either. More importantly, I realized how much I'd miss being around people, laughing and joking without the weight of my situation hanging over me. At one point, Amanda nudged me and said, "See? Told you this would be good for you." I grinned. You're not wrong. For once. That night, as I drove home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't just about moving on from Jessica. It was about rebuilding my life in a way that made me happy, that felt authentic and fulfilling. For so long, I'd been stuck in a cycle of blame and regret, but now, I could see a way out. The next day, I woke up early and decided to take a walk through the park near my house. The air was crisp, the kind that wakes you up and clears your mind. I passed families playing, couples holding hands, and joggers focused on their paths. For the first time, I didn't feel a pang of jealousy seeing other people happy. Instead, I felt content. I wasn't where I wanted to be yet, but I was getting closer. And for now, that was enough. Life was finally beginning to settle into a rhythm. I was busy with work, catching up with old friends, and even planning a road trip to the mountains, a solo adventure I'd always talked about but never found the time for. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't looking back at what I'd lost. I was looking forward to what came next. But, as life often does, it had other plans. It happened on a rainy Wednesday evening. I just finished a late meeting at work and decided to stop by the grocery store on my way home. The store was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the wet tiles near the entrance. I grabbed a basket and started wandering the aisles, mentally running through what I needed: eggs, milk, bread, and... "Mike?" The voice stopped me in my tracks. I turned slowly, my stomach sinking as I recognized the face staring back at me. Jessica. She was standing a few feet away, holding a carton of strawberries. Her hair was damp from the rain, and she looked different. Not worse, not better. Just different. "Jessica," I said, my voice flat. For a moment, neither of us said anything. It felt like the whole world had stopped, the sound of the rain outside muffled by the weight of our shared history. "You look good," she said finally, offering a hesitant smile. "Thanks," I replied, my tone neutral. "You too." She nodded, setting the strawberries in her basket. "How have you been?" It was such a simple question, but it felt loaded, like it carried all the things we weren't saying. "I've been okay," I said. "Figuring things out." "You?" "Same," she said, her smile faltering. "It's been different." I didn't ask her what she meant. I didn't want to know. For a moment I thought that would be the end of it, that we'd exchange polite goodbyes and move on. But Jessica lingered, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Mike, She paused, biting her lip. "I've wanted to reach out, but I didn't know if you'd even want to hear from me." I stayed silent, unsure of what to say. "I'm sorry," she continued, her voice trembling. "For everything. I know that probably doesn't mean much now, but I need you to know I regret what I did. Every day." Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortably sincere. "Jessica," I said finally, meeting her gaze, "I've spent a lot of time trying to make sense of everything that happened. And I'm not angry anymore. But I've moved on. I have to." She nodded slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. "I understand. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, even though it wasn't. Another part of me wanted to walk away without looking back. In the end, I did neither. Take care of yourself, Jess, I said simply, and then I walked away. When I got home, I sat in the quiet of my living room, replaying the encounter in my head. Seeing her again had stirred up emotions I thought I'd buried, but it also solidified something for me. I wasn't the same person I was when she left. I wasn't defined by her choices or her mistakes. I was defined by how I'd chosen to rebuild myself in the aftermath. That realization felt like freedom. After running into Jessica at the store, I expected to feel rattled, maybe even upset. But as the days passed, I realized I wasn't as affected as I thought I'd be. Seeing her again had been unsettling, sure, but it also felt final. Like the universe had handed me a chance to close the book on that chapter of my life for good. I leaned into the life I was building, pouring my energy into the things that brought me joy. The road trip I'd been planning was just a week away, and the thought of driving into the mountains, surrounded by nothing but fresh air and open roads, was the closest thing to excitement I'd felt in years. Amanda insisted on helping me prepare. "You're going to forget something important," she said one evening as we sifted through camping gear in my garage. "I think I can handle packing a tent," I replied, rolling my eyes. She grinned, tossing a flashlight into my bag. "Sure, but can you handle remembering batteries? Or food that doesn't come in a can?" "Touché," I said, laughing. Her presence had become a constant in my life, and I found myself looking forward to our time together. Amanda had a way of making even the most mundane tasks, like picking out freeze-dried meals, feel fun. The day of the trip finally arrived, and as I loaded my car, Amanda showed up unannounced. "Thought you could use some coffee for the road," she said, handing me a steaming cup. "You're the best," I said, taking it gratefully. She leaned against the car, watching as I double-checked my supplies. "So, how long are you planning to be gone?" "About a week," I said. "Maybe longer, depending on how I feel." "Well, don't get eaten by a bear," she teased, her smile playful. "I'll do my best," I replied, chuckling. As I climbed into the driver's seat, she leaned down and said, "Hey, Mike? Yeah? You've come a long way, you know? I'm proud of you." Her words caught me off guard, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Thanks, Amanda. That means a lot." The drive to the mountains was everything I'd hoped it would be: long stretches of empty road, rolling hills giving way to towering peaks, and a playlist of songs I hadn't listened to in years. By the time I reached the campsite, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the landscape. I set up my tent, built a small fire, and sat back to watch the stars emerge one by one. It was quiet, but not the suffocating kind of quiet I'd felt in the house after Jessica left. This was a peaceful quiet, the kind that made you feel small in the best possible way. As I sat there, sipping on a can of lukewarm beer, I thought about how far I'd come. The heartbreak, the anger, the self-doubt, it was all still there, but it didn't define me anymore. I wasn't just surviving. I was living. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited about what came next. The mountain air had a way of clearing my mind. Each morning, I woke to the sound of birds and the rustling of trees, the sunlight filtering through the branches in golden beams. I spent my days hiking trails that twisted and turned through forests and cliffs, my legs burning with effort, my lungs full of air so crisp it felt like I was breathing for the first time. At night, I sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames chasing away the chill. I let my thoughts wander without resistance, reflecting on everything that had brought me here. On the third night, I pulled out my notebook. The blank pages stared back at me, daring me to write something meaningful. I started with a simple question: what do I want? For so long, my life had been defined by what I thought I was supposed to want: marriage, stability, the image of a perfect life. But now, with everything stripped away, I realized I'd never truly asked myself what I wanted. So I started writing. I wanted peace, real peace, the kind that came from knowing I was living authentically. I wanted meaningful connections, friendships that made me feel alive, not obligated. I wanted to wake up each day with a sense of purpose, even if it was something small. And eventually, I wanted love again. Not the desperate kind that clung to the past, but the kind that grew from trust, understanding, and mutual respect. By the time I put the notebook down, I felt lighter. Writing it out made it feel real, like a roadmap for the life I wanted to build. When I returned home from the trip, I felt like a different person. The house no longer felt like a reminder of what I'd lost. It felt like a blank slate, waiting for me to shape it into something new. I spent the next few weeks making small changes, rearranging furniture, painting the walls, even planting a tiny garden in the backyard. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Amanda noticed the difference right away. "Look at you," she teased one afternoon as we sat on the patio, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "All grown up and thriving." I laughed, shaking my head. "I don't know about thriving, but I'm getting there." Her smile softened, and she raised her glass of iced tea. "Here's to that." As the months passed, life didn't magically become perfect, but it became mine. I found joy in the little things: a good book, a long walk, a quiet evening with friends. I even started dating again, cautiously at first, but with an openness I hadn't felt before. Through it all, Amanda remained a constant presence, her friendship a reminder that love didn't always have to be romantic to be meaningful. One evening, as I sat in my backyard under the string lights I'd strung up, I realized something profound. I was happy. Not in the over-the-top, fairy tale kind of way, but in a quiet, steady way that felt real. I'd survived the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the uncertainty of starting over. And now, I was building something new, something better. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready. Reflection. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that life has a way of breaking you down and building you back up in ways you never expect. Pain is inevitable, but so is growth, if you let it be. To anyone out there going through their own storm, just remember, it doesn't last forever. One step at a time, you'll find your way forward. And when you do, you might just discover a version of yourself you never knew existed. Cheers to the journey ahead.